Hi, this is Jerry Kassar, the chairman of the New York State Conservative Party, and this is Patriots Podium. Today, I wish to welcome the Reverend Jason McGuire, the executive director of New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms and its affiliate, New York Family Research Foundation. New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms is a nonprofit 501c4 educational organization. New Yorkers Family Research Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit educational organization. Reverend McGuire serves as the Conservative Party's Livingston County chairman and is a vice chairman of the state organization. Reverend McGuire preaches and teaches at churches and conferences across the state and nation. He can often be seen, heard, and read discussing topics such as parental rights, the sanctity of life, religious freedom, and the sacredness of marriage, among many conservative social topics. He is well known in Albany as an advocate for the pro-life, pro-family movement. I mean, I had the honor really of working with Jason for many years during my time in Albany, and I can tell you he's effective in many, many, many ways. Patriots Podium is a regular Conservative Party podcast that brings newsmakers, elected officials, and conservative leaders to you as they participate in a discussion on a wide range of topics. Jason, can you, thanks for being with us, and please open up with a few words, if you don't mind.
Hey, it's good to be with you, Jerry. Thank you for the invitation. I am a registered conservative, so it's good to be with you, as you noted, and thanks for those kind words of introduction. I appreciate the Conservative Party taking a stance on not just fiscal conservatism, but social conservatism as well.
Well, thank you. And I do think that is a distinction between the Conservative Party and, other good people, but they tend to shy away from some of the social issues in the state. I mean, there are a lot of organizations that are not political organizations to get involved, and they comment and have an opinion. But we're a political party where we do interviews and put candidates on a ballot line. Many you might find another ballot line, but you can feel more assured that we've asked some of these relevant questions when you find a person on the Conservative Party line. And Jason, it might be one of the reasons the Conservative Party gets multiples of its enrollment in terms of votes. Lots of people choose the Conservative Party line. Well, I would appreciate, just to start out for our audience, if you could maybe explain the difference between the C3 and C4 nonprofit educational organization identifications each group has.
Yeah. So I serve as the president of New Yorkers Family Research Foundation, which is our 501c3. It's essentially a nonprofit educational organization. It also allows us to issue tax-deductible receipts for donations. So this is the most common type of a nonprofit. Most churches have a 501c3 status in New York. They're set up that way by definition under IRS code. And so we're set up that way. Most of the nonprofits that folks are familiar with, when you give to a charity, something along those lines, is a 501c3 nonprofit charity. We also have New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms, though, which is essentially our public affairs arm. It's our ability to go to Albany and to work with our congressional delegation in Washington, D.C., and to lobby elected officials for the values that you and I care about. So it really is a piece that allows us to then go forward and really talk to legislators specifically about their votes and how they're going to vote for or against a particular bill.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. I do think it comes up more often than you might think, and I appreciate that. So let me ask you this. During COVID, your organizations really were, and plus the churches, were a leader in litigation that successfully challenged state efforts to essentially close down in-person worship. I mean, we were even having a problem at one point, I believe, pulling cars up in parking lots. It was getting truly ridiculous. And I want to say, as a churchgoer, I really felt the need to worship in a church more than I probably have ever felt in my life. And you don't realize this until the right is taken away from you. But you were not afraid to litigate. You were pushing back against Governor Cuomo, who I think had lost his mind from the COVID. And you had many victories on various levels, including in the U.S. Supreme Court. Could you tell us a little more about your efforts during that period of time, protecting religious freedoms?
Yeah, well, that's one of the core values we seek to defend here as an organization, is that religious liberty. And during the first 2 weeks of COVID, when folks were still trying to figure out what was going on, we did encourage folks to go slow. Maybe they weren't going to meet in person for a week or two and try to figure out what this COVID thing was. But at some point along the line, it became something very different than we initially saw. And we did have cases where churches were told they could not meet in their parking lots. People were literally sitting in cars listening to sermons being preached on the radio in church parking lots, and law enforcement were telling them that they could not meet in those parking lots. Those are the types of situations where we connected churches with lawyers who could defend them in court, and they were successful. Most often, that was a lawyer writing a letter, and simply the lawyer writing a letter on behalf of the church to a local law enforcement or to a local county executive or something along that line, were able to rectify the matter. There were situations, such as in California, where some churches went all the way through and they had to fight this in court, and they were successful on that front. But it isn't just COVID that we're willing to litigate over. For the churches that I represent, I think back to when Governor Kathy Hochul sought to pass and did pass the Concealed Carry Improvement Act. It's a Second Amendment issue, but a part of that issue regarding that gun control legislation was it barred churches. They were no longer allowed to have volunteer armed church security details. Well, many of our churches have volunteer teams, people that are armed to help defend parishioners and congregants at those churches. We sought to try to get that rectified. I remember speaking with the sponsors about this the night that horrible piece of legislation was passed. It was done anyways. And because we wanted to make sure that churches kept their autonomy and the right to protect their congregants, we ended up going to court over that, organized churches across the state. That pressure of organizing the churches and going to court, I believe, influenced Governor Kathy Hochul to finally allow language into this year's budget that actually rectified that portion of the Concealed Carry Improvement Act. So as of the passage of the budget, churches can once again reestablish their volunteer security teams. That's a case where we didn't actually have to go all the way through the courts, but even the threat of the litigation got Governor Kathy Hochul and those legislators back in line and recognizing the religious liberty and the right to just personal protection that these churches have.
You also had an issue where there was an effort by government to begin to try to treat donations to religious organizations like they were political parties with full disclosures. And, I think it's clear that the Conservative Party is not about giving government everything they want. And I think that the rights of churches, the rights of religious organizations, for not-for-profits, there should also be a certain ability to work with your supporters in a manner where they're not finding themselves on some sort of government registry. Now, you had success with that too, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
Yeah, there's multiple levels of action that are going on here. One of those was, you're right, the right to protect our donors from really being unfairly targeted, from being doxxed or being harassed. We've seen this in multiple locations, to where whether you defend the sacredness of marriage or the sanctity of human life or other issues, there are people out there on the left that will target those types of donors. They go after them unfairly. They will publicly release their information. It just leads to a lot of harassment. And so we seek to protect our donors. And so we have been working with state government here in New York to make sure that we're able to protect the names and identities of our donors so they aren't unfairly targeted. And there's even been an incident that has been occurring with the state attorney general's office, to where you may remember Nikki Haley had some of the names of her donors. It was leaked out, a list of her donors. There was a stamp on that document that came from the attorney general's office. We know it came leaked out of that office. Well, we, with some friends at the Justice Center here in New York, are actually in court looking at that issue right now, trying to make sure that does not happen again. And I trust we'll have success in that area as well.
Good, thank you. Jason, Albany, as it's become more democratic, and frankly now it's really, from a control perspective, all democratic, has really become a desert for values-oriented government. The governor and the Democratic legislative leaders support legal abortions until birth. They may tell you they don't, but the reality is, the way the statute is written, there is an opening to have legal abortions until birth. I mean, they're allowing children to determine if they want to go under gender transition, and they've really removed parental authority from being the ultimate say for guiding minors in their care. And this is just a few of the woke ideas, ultra left ideas moving through those halls. Polls show that the majority of New Yorkers simply do not agree. Even in New York City, there's a significant disagreement. In your travels, do you believe New Yorkers have had enough?
I think it's starting to happen. I mean, you take a look at what happened in Virginia, for example, with Governor Glenn Youngkin. You saw how he won his election there. There was a growing parental rights movement. I think people in that state had said enough is enough, and they rose up. And I think it led to a change in that state. We're beginning to sense that here in New York as well on multiple fronts. We'll take, for example, you mentioned the gender issues, what's going on in the schools. There ought to be education, not indoctrination. But recently, the New York State Education Department came out with a 42-page document that essentially puts the student ahead of even parental rights. So let's suppose there is a student who is in sixth grade and wants to go through some form of a gender transition. Unless the student permits it, the school cannot notify the student that, or the parents, that the student has changed their name or is going through some kind of a gender transition. Now, remember, this kid can't get an aspirin in school, but they can be seeking hormonal treatments, changing their names, researching and moving ahead in surgical treatments in a vain attempt to try to change their sex. These are all things that the state says the school has the right to know, but the parent does not. Well, when I talk to parents today and they hear that kind of thing that is occurring in the schools, they're outraged. When parents hear that their daughters have to share locker rooms or restrooms, changing facilities, hotel rooms when teams travel, those types of things, with people of a different biological sex, that puts parents up in arms. So our organization has launched a petition at newyorkfamilies.org that you can visit and you can sign that asks and really demands that the state ed department rescind this type of guidance. And I'm encouraging folks to visit newyorkfamilies.org, sign that petition, and tell state ed enough is enough. We're in the cusp of a growing parental rights movement here in the Empire State.
newyorkfamilies.org. I got that right? newyorkfamilies.org?
Yes.
Thank you. So, really, to the point you've just made, there is a so-called Equality Amendment on the 2024 ballot, which enshrines in the state constitution some of the most anti-family, anti-values, and pro-abortion policies that the state has produced. And it's significant if it's enshrined in the state constitution. It further limits our ability to challenge, even as views of the New Yorkers change and more people take our side. The state constitution becomes a higher wall to climb to try to fix some of this stuff. So the Conservative Party plans to fight this at the ballot box in 2024. I know you plan to educate New Yorkers on this amendment. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, we're concerned about this amendment for many of the reasons you cited. You're probably going to see this amendment sold as abortion rights or as a pro-abortion amendment, and it would certainly do that. I mean, it would not allow discrimination on pregnancy or pregnancy outcomes, aka abortion. But really, I think the average New Yorker has to ask themselves, look at where we are as a state. What's really going to change regarding abortion if this thing passes? It does make it a constitutional protection. But what we ought to look at is what else will happen if this amendment passes. And that's the Trojan horse. If this amendment passes, it essentially will remove many parental rights from our state constitution. Many of the things I just referenced that the state ed is seeking to do in keeping parents away from what's going on in their kids' lives, well, that would become a constitutional obligation in our state if this were to pass. So it is a Trojan horse that will remove many parental rights from families here in the Empire State if that so-called equality amendment is to pass in November of 2024.
Let me ask you, even though President Biden has succeeded in making mortgages so high that nobody can actually afford to leave the state anymore, are you finding, like I'm finding, that a lot of our voters, if they can flee, they do flee?
Yeah, we're seeing that certainly among our donors, among our base. Folks are leaving the state. They're moving to places like North Carolina, Tennessee, Florida, and other places. They're looking. There's a realignment that's occurring over the nation, and I believe that when people move, they're considering states that more politically align with their values. And so there are folks that are moving to places like Florida, I mentioned, and Tennessee and other places, to where their values are better represented than they are in New York. So a realignment is occurring. But you know what? There are people here that even though they don't share my politics, they're also fleeing the state because they just can't afford to live here anymore. Or they're concerned about the crime issues, or they're concerned about some of the things happening with the asylum seekers. I mean, some of the latest statistics that are coming out regarding that, the polling showing that 82% of New Yorkers, are very concerned about this issue. We look at Governor Kathy Hochul's falling polling numbers. I mean, you can't disconnect the politics from the people, from the places that people are moving.
And I do think, there's, as much as the desire is there, there's really less ability financially to take these actions right now. And so, people are going to need to stay and fight. And I will say we did have some encouraging election results last year, and hopefully it's a trend. Now, I must say this: the trend is really about the fact that people have had it with bad policies, whereas you would really prefer to be in a situation where you were improving a government that you like. But the Conservative Party, your organizations, we fight. Now let me just get a little bit more into that. Your organization, actually, I'm not sure which one of them, because they don't all do this, rates legislators. Which of the two groups actually does the ratings?
Yeah, New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms will, really help people understand where their elected officials are standing on these issues. And I think as we look ahead to 2024, this is going to be sought after data. People want to know where their state senator, their member of assembly, their member of Congress stands on many of the votes that we care about. I do think there's some tribalism that's occurring today. People are tending to vote along party lines more than maybe they had previously, but not exclusively. I think that the evangelical voter that I often represent, they want to be an informed voter. They want to know that they're only giving their vote to elected officials who will stand for pro-life values or parental rights or some of those issues. But I also think that one of the reasons we're seeing the tribalism that is spreading, among us today, and people voting along certain ideological political parties or groups, is because of how far the parties have moved. You think about where you were as a Democrat in the 1950s or 60s or even 70s, and you just don't recognize the party today. I mean, you think of Tulsi Gabbard, who has just left the party, and she tells the story. She left because the party has left her. And I think people are seeing that. So I think an awakening is coming to New York, to where people just said enough is enough, and 2024 could look very different, particularly at that congressional level, than it has in some time.
Well, I believe many of our party leaders work hand in hand with your guideline books. I mean, we obviously advocate for a specific election of individuals, but your booklets, I believe, which are, they're factual accounting of a person's vote. I think actually have been enormously helpful in making our point. Now, you interestingly transcend it all in the sense that you're a party leader, you're certainly active in your community, and you do the various works within the church as well as within the not-for-profit community. So you actually are a very good example of what, in my view, is the Conservative Party wants to be about. So if anyone out there can emulate Jason, you should be with us. You really should be with us.
Well, I appreciate that. One of the reasons I got involved with the party was because I realized as I was telling people that they needed to get politically involved, they had to make a difference. They got to learn how to get involved in these things, in campaigns and other things. I realized the best way to learn was to get involved. The best way to make a difference was to be involved myself. So if I'm going to challenge people to do this, then I need to learn how to do it and be active. And so the Conservative Party has been a great place for me to learn and grow as a political individual, to learn about the issues and learn about how to get involved, but not just to be educated on these issues, but then how to do something about it, to make sure we have candidates that are better representing those values in Albany and in Washington, D.C.
So, Jason, do you have some final words for our viewers? And please give us again every way we can contact and assist your organizations.
Yeah, let me start with that. I'll just give you two websites that I would encourage viewers of this podcast and listeners, if you're listening in another format, to go ahead and visit. And that's our website at newyorkfamilies.org. You can spell out New York, families is plural, newyorkfamilies.org, would allow you to then go ahead and sign that petition to state ed. And there's a lot of other great articles, information there. But there's another website we also have, and that's our public affairs arm, if you will. It's albanyupdate.com. Albany, like a news update, albanyupdate.com. And then we're frequently posting new content there to help you know what's going on in New York State, particularly from a distinctly Christian and a socially conservative perspective. So, those that are not Christian will benefit from the information on that page. But again, understand I represent a largely evangelical Christian audience. And so we're writing first and foremost to those social conservatives. What I would say to people is to not give up. I think that sometimes in New York, people can get very discouraged. They can think that their efforts don't make a difference, or they get tired of the political system. And I would just encourage you to hang on and have hope. There is a change coming. We sense that. We see it growing. I see it particularly in the area of parental rights, but in other areas as well. And if we will just stand up and really seek to fight for the values that we care about, I believe we can make a difference in this state. And we're going to continue to do so until we see those values, those principles really espoused throughout the New York State.
Thank you, Jason, for spending some time with us. The Conservative Party has enjoyed a long relationship with New Yorkers for Constitutional Freedoms and your affiliate. Your work in protecting religious freedoms, parental rights, and the sanctity of life are foundational to our freedoms and our national being. Thank you, Katie and Andrew, for making this podcast happen. And for our audience, we appreciate you tuning in. On our next episode, we will be joined by Ryan Gerdusky, a journalist, a political commentator, and the publisher of National Populist Newsletter. Thanks again for joining us. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, subscribe wherever you listen and give us a 5-star rating. Until next time, I'm Jerry Kassar, and this is Patriots Podium Podcast. Thank you.